Dell was not supposed to be an obvious winner of the AI boom. The AI boom was supposed to belong to model labs, chip designers, and cloud giants. OpenAI builds the intelligence. NVIDIA sells the GPUs. Hyperscalers run the cloud. Dell sells servers, storage, and deployment. The old physical layer of enterprise technology that the cloud era was supposed to make less important. And yet, Dell's AI server business has exploded. In fiscal 2025, Dell shipped roughly $10 billion of AI servers. In fiscal 2026, that number climbed to more than $25 billion. Now Dell is guiding for $60 billion of AI server revenue in fiscal 2027. The easy explanation is that Dell sells AI servers, but the deeper explanation is more interesting. For 15 years, infrastructure moved in one direction: abstraction. Compute was rented, software was delivered through the cloud, servers disappeared behind a console, a usage meter, and someone else's balance sheet. Then AI made the machine visible again. Because once AI moves from demo to deployment, someone has to assemble the whole system that makes it work. Dell is in the story not because it owns the intelligence or the chip. It is in the story because the AI boom turned physical infrastructure from a commodity into a bottleneck. To understand how this happened, we are going to look at 4 things in this video. First, we'll break down what Dell actually sells to enterprises today. Second, we'll look at why enterprise AI requires companies to keep their data on-premise. Third, we will walk through what it takes for Dell to assemble a complete AI stack. And finally, we'll examine the supply chain realities and thin margins that govern this hardware boom. Let's dive in. To understand why Dell's resurgence is surprising, you have to understand what Dell actually sells. Dell is best known for PCs, laptops, and monitors, but the larger strategic business is enterprise infrastructure: servers, storage systems, networking equipment, workstations, support services, and now AI-optimized systems that sit inside corporate data centers. In other words, Dell does not sell the intelligence. It sells the machinery around the intelligence. That is why Dell was never the obvious AI winner. Dell's business was the older, less glamorous part of technology, taking components made by other companies, assembling them into working systems, shipping them to customers, supporting them, and doing it at enormous scale. For years, that made Dell look like a company from the previous era. In the 2010s, the center of gravity moved away from physical infrastructure. Instead of buying and maintaining their own on-premise servers, enterprise customers migrated en masse to the public cloud, outsourcing their infrastructure to Amazon, Microsoft, and Google. The most exciting companies were not the companies assembling hardware. They were the companies abstracting hardware away. Software became a subscription. Infrastructure became a cloud bill. The data center became something many companies tried to outsource or avoid entirely. In that world, Dell looked boring. It still sold PCs and servers. Important? Yes. Exciting? Not really. Then AI changed the definition of the future. Because the AI boom did not just create demand for models, it created demand for machines. And suddenly, Dell's old muscles became relevant again. The key to Dell's resurgence is that enterprise AI is different from ordinary cloud software. Enterprise AI is not just an application you log into. It is compute attached to enterprise data. And enterprise data is messy. It sits inside old databases, private networks, regulated systems, and decades of operational workflow. That creates a problem the cloud era never fully solved. Not every workload wants to move towards compute. Sometimes compute has to move toward the workload. The economic argument Dell is making is straightforward. The further a token travels from the data that generated it, the more it costs. If enterprise data lives on-prem, running AI entirely in a public cloud can mean paying to move data, accepting latency, and taking on governance risk when sensitive information leaves the customer's environment. The cleaner answer, in Dell's framing, is to bring inference closer to the data.
The first thing, Arthur will expand on this in a bit later. Build an AI-ready data foundation. Michael said this yesterday. AI runs on data. However, in most enterprises, the data is scattered across dozens of systems. 80 to 90% of it is unstructured. None of it's connected in a way that an agent can use effectively. To power agents at scale, you need a real-time connected knowledge layer. And here's the structural and architectural decision you're going to have to make as a result. Don't move the data to the AI, move AI to the data. That's fundamentally a different approach, and quite frankly, a decision that you need to make now.
That is the reversal. AI is pulling infrastructure back toward the data. And once that happens, the question changes from which model do we use to who builds the machine that runs it. By the way, understanding these second-order effects of the AI boom, not just who has the best model, but who benefits when infrastructure becomes scarce again, is exactly what we cover every week in our newsletter, ARPU. If you want to get this kind of analysis in your inbox, subscribe at the link in the description. The easy version of Dell's AI story is almost too simple. NVIDIA makes the chips, Dell puts them in servers, customers buy the servers. But an AI server is not the full AI stack. It is the expensive core of it. Around that server, you still need storage to feed the model, networking to connect the GPUs, power and cooling to keep the rack alive, software to manage the workload, security to protect the data, and services to make the whole thing useful inside an actual enterprise. That is the part most companies do not want to build themselves. A bank does not want to become a hardware company. A hospital does not want to assemble a GPU cluster. A pharmaceutical company does not want to architect the entire infrastructure layer before it can run a drug discovery model. They want the capacity, the governance, and a system that works after the demo is over. The most compelling proof of this shift doesn't actually come from Dell. It comes from the very cloud giants that spent the last decade arguing physical servers were obsolete. At a recent Dell event, Google Cloud CEO Thomas Kurian announced a partnership to bring Gemini directly into customers' private on-premise environments. The product version is telling. Gemini and Google Distributed Cloud running on Dell PowerEdge servers. The model is Google's. The physical system inside the customer's environment is Dell's. That is the key signal. Even the cloud companies are helping bring AI on-prem. And once the model moves into the customer's environment, someone has to build the system around it. That is what Dell is packaging under the name AI Factory. And despite the marketing language, the concept is actually useful. An AI Factory is not just a server. It is a system. The compute layer, GPUs, CPUs, accelerators, servers. The data layer, storage, data pipelines, enterprise systems. The physical layer, racks, power, cooling, networking. The operating layer, security, governance, workload management, services. That is the part of the AI boom that often disappears behind the model names. And Dell talks about this through a metric that matters more than it sounds: time to first token. Every day a GPU sits idle is a day it's costing money without making any. Dell says its infrastructure can roll off a truck and be operational within 24 to 36 hours. That's not the glamorous part of AI, but it is the part that turns a purchase order into working capacity. Now, building the system is only half the problem. The other half is more basic. Can you even get the parts? In normal times, supply chain is invisible. Nobody cares how the server parts arrived as long as the server shows up. But when memory prices move five-fold, quotes expire in days, and customers are fighting for allocation, supply chain stops being backstage. It becomes the show. The AI boom drove supply constraints across memory, SSDs, GPUs, and networking components. Dell's own executives said the spot market for DRAM rose 5.5 times over a few months, fast enough that a server quote written on Monday can be underwater by Friday. Dell CFO David Kennedy gave an example of what that looks like operationally. Speaking at a tech conference, he said Dell looked at thousands of traditional server quotes that were ready to go out, pulled every one of them back, went dark for roughly 36 hours, repriced them, and then pushed them back into the field. That sounds boring, but it's what execution looks like when component inflation moves faster than the enterprise purchasing cycle. This is where Dell's breadth matters in ways that are easy to miss. Dell buys components across PCs, traditional servers, storage, and AI systems, with supplier relationships going back decades. That scale gives Dell leverage and supply visibility that smaller competitors cannot easily replicate. In the latest quarter, the company's infrastructure solutions revenue hit $29 billion, up 181% year over year, with AI server revenue reaching $16 billion in the quarter alone. But this is a harder business than the revenue numbers suggest. Dell's AI server business operates at mid-single-digit to low double-digit margins, thin enough that volume and velocity matter every quarter. This is not a Dell-specific challenge. Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, Dell's closest rival in enterprise servers and data center hardware, is dealing with the same economics. HPE has guided its AI server segment to 7 to 9% operating margins for the year, and has said that when AI server revenue becomes a larger share of the quarter, margins compress. That's the uncomfortable part of the AI server boom. The demand is extraordinary. The backlog is real. But for Dell and HPE, the business looks like high-speed hardware assembly, expensive components, thin margins, and very little room for execution mistakes. Those thin margins also mean Dell needs customers to keep buying, and that depends on customers actually succeeding with what they have already purchased. Enterprise AI adoption is messier than the headlines suggest. Data sits in fragmented systems, workflows are siloed, governance frameworks are still being written. A company can buy the AI factory and spend months figuring out where to point it. Dell can build the machine, it can't make the machine useful. So where does that leave us? Dell did not come back by becoming the brain of AI. It came back because AI still needs a body. The cloud era made that body disappear. Compute became a line item. Infrastructure became someone else's problem. The AI era reversed that. Suddenly, hardware is scarce. Power matters. Cooling matters. Deployment matters. The boring physical layer is no longer background plumbing. It is the bottleneck. That's why Dell matters again. And the next question, if AI needs this much physical infrastructure, who actually makes money from the build-out, is exactly what we track every week in our newsletter, ARPU. If you want this kind of analysis in your inbox, the link is at the top of the description. Thanks for watching.